What's up, everyone? Jeremy Gerard from Mythic Customs here with one of my short customizing tutorial videos. Today, we're going to talk about using 3D printed parts and add-ons. And specifically, if you've never used any of those parts yet and you've seen all these cool designs from different parts creators and you want to get started, but you're feeling kind of overwhelmed by the variety out there and the complexity of possible projects, and you're not sure exactly where to get started as a new customizer, hopefully this video will help you answer that question. So I've got, some tips to look along the way. And realistically, the parts I'm going to look at today, a lot of them come from Legion Shop and Wolf King Customs, two organizations, two companies that I work very, very closely with. But the tips that I'm sharing are not exclusive to those companies. These are really general tips that will work with any 3D parts from any of the amazing creators out there creating these add-ons for Mythic Legions. What I want to try to show you is the thought process that I think you should go through when you evaluate parts. Because let's be honest here. First, get started. If you've never customized before, there are some parts out there that if you start with that, you are setting yourself up for a very, very difficult time. Importantly, what you may be doing is setting yourself up for a project that may be a little bit beyond where your skills are as a new customizer. And the worst thing that I see happen is when a new customer is super enthusiastic, they spend money on these parts, they spend money on paints and brushes, they get started and they look at that first project and it's not what they imagine in their head, and they lose that enthusiasm and they don't do a second project. That's the worst thing, because I really do think that this hobby, this customizing aspect of the hobby has so much to offer. It is so much fun. And if you really start with projects that are going to be suited to the beginner level and you build up your skills over time, before you know it, you will get to those most complex parts and you'll be able to absolutely kill any custom that you set your mind to. So let's take a look. The first, when you're looking at all these different parts, right, there are a lot of different pieces out there. There's obviously custom heads, and that's really where a lot of the custom creators started. Custom add-on heads for Mythic Legions bodies. But now we've also got hands and feet and limbs and torsos and weapons, you name it. The Mythic Legions add-on community has been producing it. If you look at the inventory we have over at legionshop.com, there is an incredible variety of artists that are contributing, and there's an incredible variety of different kinds of parts available. Those are all open to you to get started. So where should you get started? My suggestion is begin with weapons. Weapons are typically some of the easier parts for you to work with. In some cases, just a little bit of dry brushing and maybe a base coat of paint, and you will have a painted weapon that will look good in Mythic Legion's hand. Let me show you one right here. So this weapon here, these are the Kitsune swords that were created by the Toy Forge and are sold at legionshop.com. It's a set of two swords, a longer sword and a shorter sword, that were kind of meant to go with my Kitsune Shadow Ninja Fox type character. That head is also available at Legion Shop as well. If you look at these parts, they are very, very simple pieces. All that I did on these parts here is base them out in a little bit of black spray paint. And I'll actually show you the paint that I use right here, because that might be helpful. Whenever I base out any pieces, I don't use primer. That's one of the questions I get a lot. Do you prime your pieces? I don't. But when I'm dealing with 3D printed pieces that come in, usually like a gray resin or something, they all come in all different color resins. You get all different crazy colors sometimes. I like to start with a base color of black. So this is what I use, this Krylon Color Master Flat Black. So what I will do is I will spray those out in black to get that nice base coat first. Then if you look here, you can see that all I did was a little bit of dry brushing on the blade and on the little pommel at the end of the handle. What I did was just, if you know dry brushing, you take a little bit of paint in a paint tray, dip your brush in, and then you immediately dry that brush off on like a paper towel. You want it to really have just a hint of paint, just the thought of paint on that brush, really, really dry. That's why it's called dry brushing. Then as you very lightly rub that paintbrush on the blade, you're going to see that paint very slowly start to cover that surface. It's what gives you that very controlled, very measured application, very organic type look, because you're not just globbing the paint on, and you can build that paint up to get the coverage you want. But in this particular case, that's all you would have to do here. A little bit of paint on that sword blade, on that pommel, and you would have yourself that custom looking sword. Now, not all weapons are as straightforward, I guess, as that one. Let me show you another weapon that I painted somewhat recently that's got a little bit more detail work in it. And that's this custom axe that's from Josh, Mr. Mezcad, they call him. I'm not going to try pronouncing his name because I'm sure I will do a bad job with it. It is a tricky name for me. This is a wonderful looking piece, but you can see it's got a couple different colors here, but they all use that same principle I just mentioned, a black base coat of paint and then some dry brushing different colors. In this particular case, I dry brushed 3 colors on this. So I dry brushed some brown onto the handle to really bring out the look of that kind of the wrapping around the handle. Then I dry brushed that kind of like bronzish type color at the top of the axe and also down here at the bottom where the spike is. And finally, I dry brushed some silver onto the blade part here and the blade part at the bottom, the end of the axe. Those 3 colors, even though it's more than the Kitsune sword I just showed you, were very, very easy to do. They went on very, very smooth, and by dry brushing, you can build them up. Now, one thing I will tell you is if you are going to paint weapons, you're going to paint the handles. Handles go in action figure hands. So that's an opportunity where because you're trying to put them in the hands, you could have some paint rub there. If it's really light paint, a little bit of dry brushing paint, it shouldn't be too bad. But the other thing you're probably going to want to do is you're going to want to protect it with a slight coat of sealer. This is the sealer I like to use. It's from Testers Spray Lacquer, Spray Lacquer. This is a dull coat. So this is not a glossy type coat. This is a dull coat. Just a little bit of this. It goes on. It will look wet when you spray it and you kind of freak out for a minute like, oh goodness, I just made it glossy. Don't worry about it. It dries nice and clear. Just give it a good shake. Dull coat, Testers Lacquer. Okay. I find that to be really, really helpful. And one thing to keep in mind, just as you're starting to do this, is as you start to dry brush this stuff on or paint these details, you may color outside the lines a little bit, right? You may have a tiny little bit of paint bleed. And I'm going to apologize in advance for what I'm going to do to you right now, because if you collect action figures, but you've never actually really observed those action figures, like you've never held them close and really looked closely at them, do so, okay? If you look at action figures, mass-produced action figures, whether we're talking about Mythic Legions, whether we're talking about Marvel Legends, Star Wars Black Series, Mezco, whatever, if you look at those figures closely, look at the paint applications. They are not perfect. Now, something like a Mezco, which is, $100 and up for a figure, their paint apps tend to be a lot cleaner than like a Marvel Legends, which is a mass market figure at $20. As you'd expect, right? A higher, cost collector focused figure like a Mezco or even a Mythic Legions are going to probably have sharper paint applications than some of those mass market pieces from Hasbro. It's to be expected. Nothing against the Hasbro toys. They look great for what they are. And the reality is all of these toys are meant to be put, the collector toys at least, on a shelf and observed. From a distance, you would never see those slight paint imperfections. But if you hold it close and examine it, you will notice that they are most certainly there. So the reason I'm telling you, and I said I apologize for this, because now that you know that and you look at your figures, you're going to start to notice that these are not as clean. These are not as crisp as I seem to once thought. But the reason I'm telling you is to cut yourself some slack. when you're painting these custom pieces and it's not perfect, remember, really none of these things are. Really none of these hand-painted pieces from customizers, myself included, or factory-produced mass-market pieces are perfect every single time. If there are slight imperfections, that is okay. As long, in my opinion, as you can put it on your display and not see that imperfection from afar, I think you're good to go. So weapons are where I would start. Now, another place that you can look early on for some pretty easy projects, in addition to weapons, would be armor. Here's a couple different armor pieces that were designed by Vincent Garma of Dragon Forge Creations. These armor pieces are also sold at legionshop.com. Both of these pieces are just a little bit of dry brushing with some silver paint on top of that black base coat, and then a little bit of accent color of some of that coppery bronzish type color. These are actually the same colors that I used on that axe that I just showed you. And those colors match both in the case of Snag on the left, that kind of matches his belt buckle. And in the case of that custom Vorthog base on the right, that silver dry brushed in that kind of coppery bronze color matches all our colors on that figure as well. So armor, by its nature, because it is armor, because it doesn't need to be perfect, especially armor that's going to go on goblins and orcs, that's going to look damaged and beat up, it gives you a high, level of flexibility where your paint applications don't need to be super clean and super smooth, but it still will look good. So weapons and armor are places where I think you can absolutely start. Now, if you want to start painting heads, right? Because that's what a lot of customizers want to do. As cool as it is to give figures new weapons, heads really transform a character. A new custom head on a figure absolutely can make it look like something different. You can do heads. My suggestion is just don't start with the most difficult ones. So here's a few examples of heads that I think are good starting points. This first one here is a custom head that was done by Walter DeMarco of Mass Customs. It was sold at Wolf King Customs. This is what he calls his Mark III Marine head. I always saw this as just a cool Dark Knight kind of character. I painted it with, a black base coat, some different dry brushing, both some silver and some brown to get the dirt. This is an effect that I call the Urzak effect because it's very similar to the colors on the Urzak orc figure. If you look back on my channel, I actually have a whole video just about creating this paint effect, the Urzak effect, so you can certainly check that out. But the point that I want to make here is if you look at this helmet, it is very, very straightforward and very, very easy to paint. There's not a lot of difficulty here. One thing I could have done, and you can do if you want, is these rivets that are around his eyebrow area. If you wanted to paint those a different color, maybe some of that bronzish coppery color I just showed on those other examples, just a little bit of dab there would add a second color to that helmet, but it's not necessary. Even looking the way it looks right here with just a black base coat and a little bit of dry brushing, it gives that helmet a really cool look that is super easy to do. And if you are a new customizer, that is a great place to start when it comes to custom heads. Let's look at a few more examples here of some other types of heads that I think you can consider starting with because they're not terribly difficult. So these are two heads, totally different kinds of looks here, two really cool characters, right? On the left, we have the squid head piece, which is from Wolf King Customs. And on the right, we have a Dragon Man type head, which is from Planetary Dog Toys. While these look really, really cool, and trust me, they totally transform your custom figures, these two paint jobs are super simple. In both cases, they started with that black base coat. On the squid head, what I did was a little bit of dry brushing purple on top. Then I dry brushed a tiny, very lightly metallic purple on top of that. That gives it a really cool sheen. It almost looks kind of wet, which is very appropriate for this type of almost aquatic looking character. Lastly, I painted his eyes. So unlike the helmet we just saw where it didn't need eyes painted, in this particular case, the character does need eyes. But both the squid head and the dragon, the nice thing is they don't need ultra detailed eyes. These are not human eyes. These are not dwarven eyes where we have to paint, the eyeball and the iris and everything. These are eyes that just one color will work fine. And again, there's precedent for that in the Mythic Legions line. When I create my customs, I like them to look like they belong with my other Mythic Legions figures. So in this particular case, what I'm doing is, if you look at the orc figures in Mythic Legions, or you look at the goblin figures, their eyes are all one color. They're like all yellow. So that's what I'm going for here. Just that one color that is going to, show that it's an eye without me having to do a lot of detail. So in the case of Squid Head, all that is a little dab of white, using a very, very fine paintbrush, being very deliberate and careful to put those on there with my motions. With the Dragon Man, same process. Instead of dry brushing the purple, I dry brush on some red. Then I used a little red metallic that's going to make it look like those dragon scales are shimmering and like really, really kind of metallic and cool. In this particular case, he does have a little more detail. So then I added a little bit of paint to his horns and his teeth, dry brushing on the horns, deliberately painting those teeth to bring those out. And those are kind of like a whitish color I used there to create those effects before I painted the yellow eyes. A few more paint applications than Squid Head, but ultimately not very difficult to do. As cool as these heads look, these are some early painting projects that as you get some experience under your belt, I absolutely think that you can tackle these. Building on that, you can go beyond heads, right? It doesn't only have to be heads that you are doing. You can combine some of these things I'm showing you to create different characters that match heads and body pieces or armor pieces. So this turtle-like character here is one of the Akupara characters that I created along with Walter DeMarco for creation, for sale at Wolf King Customs. This was the evil character in that wave. And it's a kind of snapping turtle head, and we also have these cool turtle feet. So this is on a Gonk's body. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to match the top of that foot, the rim of that foot armor. I want that to look really good with the Gonk's body. And then I want the scales of that foot, the skin, I guess, of that foot to match the head I'm going to paint. This is another simple one that's just like the dragon and the squid head I just showed you. Black base coat, little bit of green dry brushing, a little bit of metallic on top of that, very lightly with the metallic, just to give it that kind of sheen. And then I paint the eyes. Same thing on the foot. The only difference here is while I'm using the green and the metallic on the foot for the actual armor, I'm doing a little bit of brown dry brushing and then a very slight little bit of orange to match that Gonk's paint color. You got that kind of rusty looking armor. So as you get these effects down, you can start to transition from heads to body part to armor parts, and you can start to combine these pieces. Combining that head and those feet on this character, on that Gonk's body, really gives you a cool character that is further transformed because it's not just a head, now it's some new body parts as well. But you're building up to this. You're starting all of the skills that I'm talking about, all of these basing it out, dry brushing, you're building up from those weapons, which have a high level of, ability for you to mess up and go outside of the lines. It's kind of a rustic looking weapon. That's not a big deal. Then to the heads, that's a little more complex. To that dragon head that has a little bit more details, where with the teeth and with the eyes, you're building up these different projects to get more and more complex along the way. Couple more examples I'll show you as we build on the complexity here. These are examples of paint matching. So as you start to get more complex, one of the the things when it comes to customizing that certainly is challenging is trying to match custom parts paint-wise to existing bodies that you're putting them on. So in this particular case here on the left-hand side, I have my Fury Clan Jaguarian who's matched to a Fury Clan Orc body, that red. And then the other one we have here is my Shadow Jaguarian who's actually matched to a Chronaw body. Now, both of these are not terribly difficult to paint, but a lot more difficult than the things that we've seen. Specifically, that Jaguar and that Shadow one that has the open mouth, that's another level of complexity. And I'm going to talk about open mouth characters in a moment. But when it comes to paint matching, that is going to be another level of difficulty. Now, I've recorded another video that I'm going to post in a few weeks around paint matching kind of cheats, some tips and cheats that you can use. So keep on the lookout for that. So I won't talk too much about paint matching here, other than to tell you that if you do have to match paints in any way, that is going to be a higher level of complexity. So when you're planning out your recipes, if you're putting a body, you're putting a head on a body that's fully armored and you're not trying to match the head itself to any of the armor, to any flesh or anything, that is going to be much easier to do than something like you see here, where you're going to need to match the flesh of what you're painting, whether it's a human head, a dwarf head, or one of these feline-like heads. If you have to match it to an existing color on a figure, that is a higher level of complexity. Build up to that, but you may not want to start there. So the last examples we're going to look at, which I would say are probably some of the most complex parts that you can paint, are these examples. Now, these are two different examples. On the left-hand side, we've got a wicked-looking demon head by Emil Wickman that was sold through Wolf King Customs. On the right-hand side, we have this cool kind of half-giant looking head from Planetary Dog Toys and Sabadam. On the left-hand side with that demon, the reason I'm suggesting that is complex is not only did I have to paint match that head to the Shadow Equidron body, but when you look at the crazy maw on that figure, having to paint the insides of the mouth, having to paint the gub line, having to paint all those teeth, that is a level of complexity that you can build up to. But if you start with this type of a part, it's very likely going to look a little sloppy. It's very likely going to be really challenging. And as I said at the start, you don't want to do something that is going to be too hard for you to execute up front, thereby sapping your enthusiasm for the customizing hobby as a whole. Now, when we go over here, this is an example of another kind of complexity that I always talk about. And this is having to paint any human or realistic-like features. In my opinion, the most difficult parts to paint are any parts where the eyes cannot be executed as a single color. As I talked earlier, orcs and goblins and so forth, where there's just one single color eye, that's not that difficult to do. But when you have to paint actual eyes, and you've got to paint the whites of the eyes and the pupil and iris and everything about them, that is challenging, because nothing makes a custom look amateurish more than badly executed eyes that are supposed to look realistic, right? That is the part that took me the longest to do. For years, I actually shied away from any kind of custom that I had to paint realistic eyes, like this half giant that I painted. But over time, I challenged myself. I made a lot of mistakes. Don't delude yourself that we don't all make lots of mistakes. We certainly do. There's a learning curve to all of this. You may see the Instagram posts of all the custom parts and all the awesome pictures. What you're not seeing are all the parts that we scrapped or based back over and started over because we messed up to get to the point that we can share pieces like this. So these types of pieces, these higher level of complexity, whether it's because the parts are ultra detailed, the parts have, open mouths and gums and tongues and everything that you need to do, whether you need to do realistic faces, paint matching skin tones, Those level of complexity are what you want to build up to, even if you are not confident or capable early on of jumping right into those. Now, of course, if you've never customized Mythic Legions before, but you've got a lot of experience in painting, maybe you painted miniatures or something, then maybe you can jump into those more complex pieces. To me, this is the gamut. What I was trying to show here is all these 3D parts, because when you go on allegionshop.com, when you go on wolfkingcustoms.com and you look through the catalog of parts and you're like, these all look awesome, but I don't know which ones I should start with, which ones I think I can do a good job with right away. If you're looking at those, hopefully this video and this gamut of pieces that I've tried to show will get you thinking about what parts would be appropriate for you to start with. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Hopefully it inspires you to create some projects of your own. If you did find it helpful, please consider giving the video a like. If you have any comments or questions, hit me up in the comments section. I always love to reply to comments about a video's topic actually on that video's comment section. And if you enjoy the channel itself, you find it helpful, informative, entertaining, and you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so or spread the word to others. If you're in the community and you have other people that are asking questions that my channel routinely helps to answer, please send them a link my way. I always appreciate that. Until next time, I can't wait to see what you make.